We will now hear from a speaker who will answer questions including how can we trust complex technologies which are getting rolled out in double time? What's our part in this as humans? Are we still in control? Arthur specializes in professional services on business development, management, sales, and delivery experience across software delivery lifecycle. He has partnered with customers across the management hierarchy to deliver application delivery and quality transformation and adoption programs like DevOps and enterprise agility across banking and financial services, telecoms, and other solutions. Arthur, welcome to our virtual stage.
Thank you very much, Elle. All right. I want to thank Oliver and the team for the invitation. Ready to speak on this event here, right? And it's really a pleasure to do this because, AI and robotics is one of the, interesting thing, and it's really a passion of mine, right? Being a superhero, fan myself. But one of the things that, really intrigued me, and as I'm hearing the various speakers earlier on, is the whole notion of how, AI and robotics is going to be a norm of the future. All right. Now, if we look at some of the real AI stuff, this might be something that is very familiar to all of us, right? We've seen them probably on the street with, some of them we're probably having them, serve us at the cruise ships. We may have them at home, and some of them we may have them as pets, right? Now, these are AI bots or AI robots that are very commonplace, and we kind of never really think about second thoughts about, how do we actually trust them? Because fine, if they don't work, no big deal, right? We just probably get a little bit of inconvenience in there, but it doesn't really change our, life in a way. But what about this, right? Professor Helen has mentioned about the robotic, autonomous cars earlier on. I'm sure you have heard many times about robotic, surgery that's taking place, even remote surgery taking place using robots. Now, the key question here is it safe for me? Now, trusting machine becomes a problem when we become a center of a failure of the machines itself, right? So for example, why do we have a issue with that, right? And we have seen and the earlier speaker Manish, mentioned about, getting into the headline news when something goes wrong, and when things goes wrong with AI, right? It's even a bigger news because, people are looking at AI as the so-called the future of what we do things and how we live our lives as well. Now, the key question now here is then, how do we ensure the trustworthiness of these machines that we are dealing with? Are we able to make sure that, whenever we talk to a chat bot in a medical consultation, will we get a right advice? When we get into a autonomous vehicle, will we actually get a safe journey from point A to point B, right? And we definitely do not want to get into a situation like the picture on the bottom right there that gets into a situation. And we've seen many, news about such cases, even in pilots, programs. Now, given that the robotics or the use of AIs and robotics, right, in the commercial space, in public spaces, in our daily lives is not going to go away, many countries are putting now in place, right, regulations, laws, right, ensuring what AI needs to do and how to make sure that AI is actually able to deliver what it's supposed to deliver, right? Safety, security, and a whole bunch of aspects, especially when it goes into healthcare, right? How are they able to be part of the healthcare system that is going to be making life better and not, killing the patients, right? So there is a lot more regulations involved in AI that are coming into place. Almost every country in the world are beginning to put in regulations, laws, dictating what AI should do. Now, why would that be necessary? Wouldn't that impede the adoption of AI? Well, let's take a look at this, right? This is a clip out of the news article in Singapore, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with this innovative idea, right? It's great. Somebody is able to, in his time, build an AI capability to drive his bike. Now, the consequence to that is that what happens if this goes into mass market, or somebody else decides to purchase this device from this person, and then it basically goes haywire. What then? There must be a law or something that can actually prevent some things like that from happening, right? Now, this is where, if I pick up a quote from the EC white paper on artificial intelligence, right? So one of the things that they have mentioned in the white paper or in the article is that there are two types, right, of AI use and so forth. And the earlier one that we see in our households and so forth are what we consider as low risk, right? Because they don't create life-threatening situations. But where there are life-threatening situations, then there are more demands for robustness and accuracy. Now, one of the other points which I'll come later is in the area of human oversight, which is being mentioned by a number of speakers earlier on as well. Now, these are the areas whereby, if we look at it, at the end of the day, AI and robotics are machines that we created, just like softwares that we have created in the past, right? So how do we develop trust, right, in this technology that we are building? Now, leveraging a paper which I've from a friend of mine, right, Professor Kang Xiao from the Missouri University and his colleague Wei Wang, right? They mentioned that in order to build trust in machines, in order to build trust in AI, there are two phases of it, right? One phase is the initial trust formation, and then it doesn't go away beyond that, right? Because AI and robotics will continue to evolve and improve over time. So there must be a continuous trust in the development process, right? A continuous trust development, so that as you begin to use the AI and robotics, there must be a mechanism whereby such a trust, gets enhanced and being developed and being, fostered over time as well. Now, if you look at all this, tenets of the trust building design, right? You'll see that the highlighted ones are the ones that seems to be very similar to how we look at software quality. Right? At the end of the day, if you're looking at it, it all talks about the quality. Now, the other aspects are more social, more perception, more user, and more people related, right? And that's something that we have to handle, but it will come. I'll come to that in a short while. But the key thing is, as we develop, as owners, as business owners, and as innovators and designers of AI and robotics, one of the things that we can do as part of that trust building is to make sure that we are able to do what is technically possible, right? So coming from a technical angle, what can we do from a technical angle to develop quality? And this is where quality has to be engineered. It can't be that, right, we build a whole bunch of stuff in the lab, and then after that we put it out into the market and then get it to try it out, right? It's too late. By the time you put it out in the market, it's going to create problems, right? Now, so this is the whole idea of what, my passion on that, which is how do you engineer quality, not into just software, but into the new technology, into the AI, into the robotics. Now, this has to be intentionally built, right, as part of the whole development process of the AI and robotics. Now, how do we do that? Similar for what we do with software assurance, right? It's kind of the same, but yet at the same time, it's different. There are many areas whereby we have to deliver from a quality assurance for traditional applications that we see in the banks or whatever, right? But in the AI space, in the robotic space, things are less clear in terms of what we need to deliver. How do we measure, right? So for example, our output-wise, in a bank statement, for example, in the banking application, you know that when you transfer money, X dollars go in, X dollars get credited. It's very deterministic, right? Whereas in the area of AI and robotics, right, when you give a command to the robot, now how that command is being interpreted gets determined by a lot of different factors. So there is a lot more probabilistic nature in the outcome, right, of an AI device or an AI solution in itself. Now, I'm not going to go through all the aspects, but suffice to note that the shift in terms of a more robust way of measuring, that it's not just about, well, letting it try and go by trial and error, but a whole lot need in terms of looking at data, the security of it, right? And more in terms, one area which is new in AI for QA is that in the area of biasness. The earlier speaker mentioned about that, right? That in normal traditional software, well, a software is a software. It doesn't create a biasness in that because at the end of the day, human handles the outcome of it, right? But in an AI solution, the biasness can create a very, very adverse result. And therefore, the biasness of the solution is based on the data that we bring in. And therefore, the whole aspect of making sure that data get evolved over time, there is a good representation of inputs coming into the system itself, right? Determines how bias can be eradicated, right? So this is where, in Cognizant, what we have done is as well as part of the work in ensuring AI and technology, robotic technology getting out into the market, right? This I would say is an approach that we look at in how we are looking at assuring the whole AI solution getting from design into development and into operation. Now, the 5 aspects of it, right? Data, as we mentioned, there are biasness. We talk about leaks, outliers, coverage. We have to depend on a wider variety of data to come in to give the input. And what Manish mentioned earlier on about being good AI parent, that is a very important aspect of that, right? The second part of the model looks at the model of the quality assurance. Different application, different domain, different usage of AI and robotics, right, will determine the kind of model that you have to choose, right? The feature that you have, the kind of performance, what kind of error that you have to look out for. The key component in the center here is the trustworthiness of the AI, right? And this is where we have to look at all aspects of fairness, right? The data that we put in, the algorithms that we put in, how are we looking at fairness? Are we taking only a particular experience? Are we taking only a particular domain? Are we taking only a particular ethnicity when we look at the AI decision-making process? And trustworthiness as well, not it's just only in fairness, but also in the area of interpretability, right? This is a key part because unlike software that we use, most of the time, even the mobile phone that we hold in our hand, many of us probably don't know what is in the logic or in the design that goes behind the mobile phone, right? Because it doesn't really impact our a livelihood. I mean, although yes, it does when it fails, when you can't do a transaction when you're standing in front of a counter, it's going to be a huge embarrassment, but it's not as bad as killing yourself, right? But the whole aspect of living your life to the AI and robotics requires us to be able to question what goes into the design and how is the AI making its decision and how does it come to the result that it's looking at, right? So this is the whole interpretability of the AI assurance that is very, very key and important. And of course, the ethnicity, the privacy, the security part is going to be absolutely critical as well, because that allow us to know whether if we can actually trust our data, our actions, our decision-making process to what the AI or the robotic, device is telling us to do. All right. Oops, sorry. And then, the next part of it is really about the operational assurance, as I mentioned, right? Over time, there will be, just like software upgrades, right? You have new features, new capabilities. The challenge is that with AI It's learning a lot more about behaviors. It's learning more about human decision-making process or influencing that decision-making process. Now, this is where model decay comes in. The original model that we look at quality assurance in step 2, right, may not be necessarily be accurate anymore. So how do we look at the shift in the area of the model being updated? How do we actually shift the model as we go along, as we operate AI, and as we look at AI being put into various scenarios? How do we ensure that the model gets updated all the time? Now, at the end of the day, we are looking at customer experience, right? And this is one part, which is where we look at the collaboration of what people involved in people in the loop, humans in the loop is what is going to be important as part of the whole AI assurance approach. In the past, when we talk about software, we can develop everything in-house in the lab and then deliver it out in the market, right? But here we are seeing more and more customer experience being enforced, right, in the area of AI, right? At the end, at the bottom of it is basically this whole model and approach needs to satisfy the tenets that we spoke about earlier on. Now, the principles in any of the trusts we have to look at in 4 domains in here, or the 4 principles, right? One is continuous feedback. And this is where we look at the last mention I had, right? Customer experience. We need to take on customer experience coming in, and how do we actually build that into the model, going backwards from right to left, right? Looking at the operational part, looking at how do we interpret the data, how do we derive the model, and what kind of data that we need to put in place in order to refresh the entire journey all over again, right? Domain intensive, right? It cannot be just only an academic exercise when we look at AI development, but it has to be looking at what area are we using AI in? Which area are we using this particular robot in place, right? Is it going to be in the retail, in the bank, in the government, in social? Where is it going to be used? Because that has a deterministic factor in terms of what kind of an algorithm, what kind of an input is required in there, right? The next part is, well, the complexity of the AI and robotic is so high in the sense that we probably will not be able to do it manually. And therefore, this notion of using AI to test AI will be something that is required. So we need to be an insights-driven quality assurance, which means that humans alone is not going to be suffice in testing AI. So we need to look at using machines, right, to test AI as well. And it's allowing us to actually digest a lot more data, right, in order to be able to drive the answers that we need to give to the users, the answers that we need to give to the assurance and the regulatory bodies in terms of what goes into the AI program or the robots that we build. And the last part of it, automation. Robot and AI being in its complex nature, and robotics as well, you possibly can't do that manually as well. And this is where the whole aspect of automation first is going to be very, very critical. And this is where we have been using in Cognizant itself, right? Making use of robots to test AI solutions, right? Test real-life scenarios, giving different varied lightings, for example, in testing autonomous vehicles. Now, this is a very simple example, but again, to look at things whereby if we are using it to do it manually, it's probably going to be very, very difficult, if it's not going to be impossible as well, right? So, having talked about the technical elements of building trust, right? There's one more element that is going to be absolutely important in terms of the success of the trust building for AI and robotics, and that's us people, right? And it's probably mentioned a lot earlier on as well. One of the I would say it's objection, and one of the area whereby people are hesitant about adopting AI or robotics, right, in full-fledged, in a big way, right, is we are scared of what it means to us, not just only from our physical security and safety perspective, but in terms of our own social safety as well, right? And that's where we talk about unemployment, the lack of empathy. Well, I can go to a doctor, and the doctor look at me and says, yeah, he probably look at my countenance and everything else, and from the conversation, you probably be able to understand my state of health better than just looking on the screen. Now, even AI is doing that. Will I be able to get the same attention and the same kind of empathy from the doctor as what it is, right? And the other aspects of social divide, discrimination, and so forth that's been covered by the earlier speakers as well. And this is other areas whereby we are more likely to be threatened in the adoption of AI and robotics compared to just a pure technical nature in itself, right? In order to address that, right? So these are, taking the same paper I was mentioning earlier on, these are the soft aspects of trust that needs to be built. And what it means in the first column there is that you must be able to tell people why the AI and the robotic is necessary. The representation, you have to create the right image and the perception, right? And through early adoptions, you get user reviews, getting those positive feedback to help people understand that it's not about taking things away from the people that they are depending on the jobs that they are doing, right? The robots taking away the jobs, right? The next part here, and this area of collaboration and communication, and this is where, it's mentioned a number of times as well. Robotic in itself, if you look at it and just implementing it without the concern or without the element of human in that consideration, is going to create that social bonding between man and machine, right? A divide in the man and machine bonding, right? So therefore, communication and collaboration is involved. It's important in that way of helping the people that was going to be working with the robots and AI to know that they are not getting replaced. In fact, they are getting elevated in terms of the way that they are able to do their job. Manish spoke about that earlier on, about the 21 jobs of the future, right? There are new jobs that is going to be done. And this is where we actually look at, not a job replacement, right? But a job enhancement. How can we use AI and robotic to enhance jobs that is going to be there, right? And last part of it is really goal congruence. I think what earlier speaker mentioned as well. Why are we implementing this? What is it indeed for me? How can I benefit from the implementation of the AI or the robotic solution in my life, right? What do I gain out of this? At the end of the day, humans are still pretty much egocentric, right? So what is it for me that I need to be able to gain benefit from that as well? And this is where we have the concept in Cognizant, right? Where we actually look at using, instead of just purely AI and robotics, we focus on the term of collaborative AI and robotics. And this is where we look at employing AI and robotics to assist and complement, not to replace, right? There is a place in the whole life cycle of a business for humans to play a part in there. And therefore, the need for them to be assisted, for them to be complemented, right, means that they can actually do more complex jobs, more intense jobs, more risky jobs without risking their lives, right? And this will be something that will give a trust of why a worker or someone to trust on the machine that they will. Now, what other aspects of this social element of using AI and robotics is going to be important, right? With COVID, we know that there is mobility issues. People are not being able to travel anywhere. With the number of work that is going to be done, we are lacking the manpower to do that. Now, with AI and robotics, right, we are looking at being able to harness more intelligence, more efforts, right, being able to come into play together with every one of us. Now, this is where we look at helping, even using AI and robotics to create inclusion in workplace, whereby earlier on, someone, because of their limitations, right, may not be able to do certain jobs. But now with the use of AI and robotics, they may be able to be a part of a business that handles a much more complex job, right? And that means from a social angle, we are looking at a much more, I would say, a much more welcoming introduction of AI and robotics. And that overall, right, builds the trust that we need to see in robotics. Now, wrapping up on that, right? So, I mentioned I am a superhero fan. So will this be the collaborative robot that we will see in the future, right? Not just a machine by itself, but man and machine working together. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Arthur. And we hope you learned from this session on trusting machines to